A new column for The Economist offers tips from a dozen foreign diplomats and American officials on how to avoid Oval Office humiliation when President-elect Donald Trump returns to the White House. Joining us now, the author of that piece, geopolitics editor at The Economist, David Rennie. David, good morning. So the fact that we even have to say that out loud, that there is a guide to avoiding humiliation inside the Oval Office, tells us something about this incoming administration. So what do you say to foreign leaders as they deal with Donald Trump once again?
Look, every foreign ministry and government worth its salt is preparing madly for how to deal with Donald Trump because they were taken by surprise in 2016. Not that many suspected he would win. And it was a pretty rough experience for some world leaders, Angela Merkel in Germany, Justin Trudeau in Canada, who we know from Trump officials at the time, he came to really loathe them. And that had consequences for their country's policies. And look, foreign governments, they don't get to vote in American elections. They have no choice. They have to deal with the President of America. So they are all studying, comparing notes, looking at what worked and what didn't work last time. And the column I wrote was really trying to tackle some of this sort of advice you hear is really, really simplistic. It's you flatter the guy, you feed him burgers and ice cream, you give him treats and presents like kind of golf clubs. And the problem is, you know, you're not organizing a toddler's birthday party here. You are actually trying to run foreign policy with a world superpower. And so I set out to speak to people who'd been in the room for between them hundreds of hours and who'd seen what worked and what didn't work.
So, David, I mean, there is a sense that flattery, to some extent, does work. I mean, all these cabinet picks that he's laying out, for example, all appear on Fox News, flatter Donald Trump, support him. Yeah, I'm remembering back at the beginning of the first Trump term when he traveled to Saudi Arabia and they projected his face on the side of the hotel. President Macron has come to understand how to massage Donald Trump politically as well. So what are the limits, though, to that flattery? You say that's not quite enough to get what you want from him.
Yeah, so literally ambassadors and diplomats would say to me, flattery is sometimes essential. But that doesn't mean that you're going to change his mind or trick him or distract him into doing something that he doesn't intend to do. It's almost like a down payment. I think there is agreement among people who've negotiated with him that he's a bully, that he likes to be the most powerful man in the room and he likes deference. So to some extent, that flattery is not something that makes him happy. It's just like you know, animals in a farmyard, you roll over on your back and you show that you are the submissive animal. I think that's the role of the flattery. But a crucial point is that he'll only listen to people flattering him if he respects their strength. And the thing that seems to frustrate him the most is what he apparently calls sort of passive-aggressive, preachy, lecturing, whiny leaders. And that a lot of European leaders fall into that camp. He likes leaders who can deliver on a deal that he can cut with them at the moment in the Oval Office or when he goes and visits them abroad. And so that's really what interests him. And the flattery is necessary, but as one diplomat said, it's not a silver bullet.
So, David, we saw wildly different responses yesterday from the leaders of Mexico and Canada as to Trump's trade threats. Also, we're hearing from some Trump advisors who already, once he takes office, want to schedule another meeting with Kim Jong-un, leader of North Korea, believing that face-to-face diplomacy could help relations there. And as part of that is the idea of the madman theory. The Trump team, the first time around, leaned into the idea because he was so unpredictable, that made him hard to deal with. Do you think that could be effective for him going forward?
It works as long as people don't think you're bluffing. And I think that one of the concerns, you know, looking at his record in the first term was that sometimes a lot of those kind of fire and fury threats to kind of potentially start a war with North Korea, people came to believe in some pretty rough corners of the world that actually he wasn't really that keen on using military force, that he likes to talk tough. He talks big, but it's not actually real. And I can tell you that because until quite recently, I was our Beijing bureau chief, and I spent years talking to Chinese officials, some very senior officials, about how they view Donald Trump. And by the end of his first term, look, they take him seriously because he could be about to hit their economy with huge tariffs. They don't underestimate how dangerous he could be. But they came to believe that he's not actually really as hawkish or as tough or as keen on military force as he likes to make out. And that their view is that he was a very transactional guy surrounded by genuine China hawks. And if only they could get to him and cut a deal directly, actually, maybe he doesn't believe in very much. He doesn't dislike dictators. He doesn't disapprove of people using iron-fisted tactics. He often says that's clever and smart. And so I think the world's dictators, they're wary of him. that unpredictability clearly gives him an edge. But they came in their first term to think that maybe he's not quite as tough and willing to start wars as some of his rhetoric might lead you to think.
All right, we're about to find out. Geopolitics editor at The Economist, David Rennie, with a fascinating piece. David, thanks so much. We appreciate it. Rev, you've dealt with Donald Trump for a long time, decades and decades and decades. There are some caveats to it, but it is the case that he wants to be flattered.
Oh, flattery gets you everywhere. And I think that now Donald Trump's at the place he wants everyone to say, he made it, you did it. There was a story in the New York Times the other day about how he came back to New York to go to the fight because he wants New York to love him. Yeah. He always sought that. And I think that in my experiences with him, I've marched on him, I've picketed him, National Action Network has fought with him, and then he'll come to a National Action Network convention. He came twice because he still wants to. I'm not really that bad, right? I mean, he has that in him, and you can't get that out of him. I think that the fact that he wants to be liked is what many narcissists always want. And I think that those world leaders that can play on that can get some advantage on dealing with him.
I'm deeply skeptical of this, but I'm putting it out there because experience and everything else has taught us otherwise. But is there a world, Rev, you know him, where he can now say he's a two-term American president? He's in that club. A world where he can be, I'm not saying he's going to be this great bipartisan unifier, because he's not going to be. We know that. But where he changes his approach slightly, at least from the first term, and does try to reach across a little bit and get some things done, because that was the promise in 2016. I'm going to disrupt the way things are done in Washington. I'm not a politician. I'm a CEO. I get things done. I'll talk to anybody. I'll work with anybody. That didn't bear out. Do you see any world where that changes even marginally this time? I
think the fact that he can't, by a constitution, run again, he has the opportunity to say, I want to really go down in history as not the guy that beat my felonies, but do something good. He does have that option, and he has certain charisma and gifts. Whether he uses them for the good angels or not is a question that many of us doubt. But I'm a preacher. I'll keep hope alive.
Yes, you will. And you'll be doing good work out in the streets this Thanksgiving, as always. Rev, great to see you. Happy Thanksgiving to you and your family.
Thank you. Same to you and your family.
Thank you, Rev.